wake up one day, look around, and wonder how they ended up where they are. But here's the truth. They didn't just end up there. They trained for it. Maybe not intentionally, maybe not consciously, but they trained for it all the same. Their habits, their decisions, their routines, they've all been shaping life the entire time. Not in one big moment, but through small, repeated actions over time. You see, every day you wake up, you're in training. The question is, training for what? Because whether you're aware of it or not, you're practicing something. You're either practicing discipline or you're practicing laziness. You're either practicing courage or you're practicing avoidance. You're practicing patience or frustration. You're rehearsing the very life you're living today. And the results? They're just the scoreboard. They show what you've been practicing most. Now, this can be a tough pill to swallow because it means you've had more control than you thought. It means if things aren't where you want them to be, it might not be bad luck. It might be bad practice. And if that's the case, don't get discouraged. Get honest, because honesty leads to adjustment. And once you see it clearly, you can start to retrain. You can turn things around. I remember when this hit me for the first time. I was frustrated. My results weren't matching my goals. I thought I deserved better. I had ambition. I had desire, but I didn't have discipline. And desire without discipline is a wish. Nothing more. I wanted success, but I wasn't training for it. I was training for frustration, for excuses, for someday. And that's exactly what I kept getting. More frustration, more excuses, more some days. But here's the good news. Training can change. Habits can change. Direction can change. The life you've been living is just the result of the reps you've been putting in. And if you don't like the results, you don't have to accept them. You can start training for something better, on purpose, with intention, with clarity. So that's what we're going to explore. How you've been training, what you've been rehearsing, and how to take full control of your direction. Not through motivation, not through inspiration, through discipline, through awareness, through repetition, because you are always training for something. And whether you meant to or not, the life you're living today is the one you prepared for. People say all the time that they want a better life, more money, better health, stronger relationships. And those are good things to want. But here's the problem. Wanting doesn't do it. Wanting is easy. Everyone wants. What matters is what you've been practicing. Because life doesn't hand you what you want. It hands you what you've earned. And you earn it through repetition, through preparation, through practice. Think about it. If you've been practicing procrastination, don't be surprised when you're surrounded by unfinished projects. If you've been practicing blame, don't be surprised when you feel stuck. If you've been practicing shortcuts, don't be surprised when the results don't last. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your training. That's the way it works. Every single day you're rehearsing something. Maybe it's patience, maybe it's excuses, maybe it's discipline, maybe it's distraction. Whatever it is, your actions are casting votes for the life you're going to live. And it's not about one day of great effort. It's about the kind of effort you've been practicing for years. Most people don't fail because they made one bad choice. They fail because they practice the wrong choices consistently. Now, this isn't about blame. It's about awareness. Because once you realize that your current results are connected to your past practices, you stop waiting for luck and start adjusting your training. You start seeing that your daily routine is the real forecast. Not your intentions, not your dreams, your habits. They'll tell you exactly where you're headed. And if you want to know what your future looks like, don't guess. Just look at what you're practicing today. That'll tell you everything you need to know. Let's say someone wants to get in shape. That's a good goal. But while they're wanting, someone else is doing. Someone else is running, lifting, walking, stretching every single day. Now fast forward 6 months. One of them has results. The other still has a wish. One of them practiced the outcome they wanted. The other just talked about it. And the difference between them isn't talent. It's repetition. One trained for it. The other didn't. This is true in every area of life. Want to be more confident? You got to practice showing up even when you're unsure. Want to be more focused? You've got to practice saying no to distractions. Want to be respected? You've got to practice being consistent, being reliable, doing what you say you'll do. Those traits don't fall from the sky. They're built, rehearsed, practiced, one day at a time. I once met a man who said he wanted to become a great speaker. I asked what he'd been doing to get there. He said he'd been thinking about it, reading about it, imagining it, but no speaking, no practicing, no feedback, no reps. And I told him straight, you're not training to speak, you're training to hesitate. Every day you don't practice, you're reinforcing hesitation. And the longer you rehearse hesitation, the harder it becomes to break. This is why your routines matter so much. Not because of what they produce in one day, but because of what they condition over time. If you make a habit of waking up early and getting to work, you're training for productivity. If you make a habit of finishing what you start, you're training for trust. If you make a habit of brushing off excuses, you're training for strength. It's all training. And training adds up. So if you're not where you want to be, don't get discouraged. Get honest. Ask yourself, what have I actually been practicing? Not what you've wanted, not what you've told people, but what you've practiced. Because practice creates your patterns, and your patterns create your life. If you want a different life, you don't need more desire. You need different training, because you don't get the life you want. You get the one you've practiced. Everything you do regularly is rehearsal. Every habit, every pattern, every small decision, it's all training. Whether you're aware of it or not, you're practicing something every day. The way you speak, the way you think, the way you handle problems, the way you respond to pressure. And over time, those rehearsals become reflexes. People don't just suddenly panic when life gets hard. They practiced panic. They rehearsed overreaction. They rehearsed complaining. And eventually, those habits became automatic. Same thing goes for patience. People don't suddenly become calm under pressure. They trained for that. Maybe not in a classroom, but in the quiet daily choices nobody saw. They trained themselves to pause, to breathe, to think. That didn't happen overnight. It was rehearsed. Let's say every morning you hit snooze 3 times. That's not just about sleep. You're training hesitation. You're rehearsing avoidance. And if you do that long enough, don't be surprised when hesitation shows up everywhere else. In your decisions, your conversations, your career. That habit is teaching you how to live, even if you don't realize it. Now flip that. Imagine someone who wakes up on the first alarm. Not because it's easy, but because they've trained themselves to act. That one small habit becomes a seed. It grows into discipline. And then discipline shows up in other places. How they manage their money, how they handle hard conversations, how they keep promises. It all starts with a habit. One habit that gets rehearsed over and over until it becomes second nature. You see, your habits are writing your script. You're practicing for something. The only question is what? Are you practicing discipline or delay? Are you practicing growth or stagnation? Are you practicing follow-through or flakiness? You may not say it out loud, but your habits are making the statement for you. And eventually, your life will speak what you've been rehearsing. I once heard someone say that how you do anything is how you do everything. And there's truth in that, because the small things don't stay small. You rehearse cutting corners on the little stuff, and soon you're doing it everywhere. You rehearse being late to minor commitments, and suddenly you're unreliable with the major ones. You rehearse quitting early, and before long, quitting feels normal. It's not about the task. It's about the habit underneath the task. That's why I tell people to pay attention to their little routines, the way you dress, the way you speak to people, the way you respond to setbacks, the way you manage 5 minutes of free time. These things seem small, but they're not. They're your practice ground. They're your training camp. And whatever you rehearse, there will eventually show up under pressure. Ever notice how some people can stay calm when everything is falling apart? That's not luck. That's not personality. That's rehearsal. They've practiced calm. They've practiced thinking clearly under stress. They've built those muscles one day at a time. Just like an athlete trains for game day, they've trained their response, and now it shows. You don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your preparation. If you want to perform well when it counts, you've got to rehearse well when it doesn't. Don't wait for the big moment to start building your reflexes. Build them now in the small, quiet, repetitive choices. That's where the real training happens. So look at your habits. Look at your routines, not with judgment, but with clarity. Ask yourself, what am I rehearsing? Because one way or another, you're always training. You're either preparing for the life you want or preparing to repeat the one you've got. Most people think that if they're not doing anything, nothing's happening. That sitting still is just sitting still. That skipping a habit just once won't matter. But that's not how it works. Because here's the truth. Neglect trains you too. Inaction is not neutral. It's active training in the wrong direction. You don't just skip the workout. You're training your body to accept weakness. You don't just ignore the book. You're training your mind to tolerate ignorance. You don't just put off the tough conversation. You're training yourself to avoid discomfort. Every time you back down, every time you delay, every time you look away, you're teaching yourself something. And what you're teaching becomes how you live. See, neglect has momentum just like discipline. Miss one day and nothing seems different, but miss 2, 3, 4. Now it's easier to keep skipping. That's the danger. Bad habits don't show up overnight. They drift in quietly, one neglected choice at a time. They don't knock down the door. They sneak in through cracks you stopped paying attention to. I've seen people ruin opportunities, not because they weren't smart or talented, but because they got lazy with small things. They stopped sharpening the blade, stopped reviewing the basics, stopped checking their habits, and eventually things slipped. But the slip didn't happen in the moment it showed up. It started long before, in the moments they let things slide. They were training for decline without realizing it. You don't just train when you're trying. You're training when you're coasting, when you scroll instead of focus, when you say, you'll do it later, when you make excuses instead of adjustments. That's not just avoidance. That's repetition. And what you repeat, you become. Whether it's building strength or building weakness, the principle is the same. I once heard someone say that how you do anything is how you do everything. And there's truth in that. Because the small things don't stay small. You rehearse cutting corners on the little stuff, and soon you're doing it everywhere. You rehearse being late to minor commitments, and suddenly you're unreliable with the major ones. You rehearse quitting early, and before long, quitting feels normal. It's not about the task. It's about the habit underneath the task. Neglect often disguises itself as rest. But there's a difference between rest and escape. Rest is earned and planned. Neglect is passive and unconscious. One recharges you, the other erodes you. And if you're not careful, you'll tell yourself you're taking a break, when really, you're just stepping away from responsibility. And the longer you stay away, the harder it gets to come back. This is why self-respect is tied directly to discipline. When you neglect yourself, you lose trust in yourself. You know deep down that you're drifting, that you're capable of more, and that inner tension starts to build. That's when the frustration creeps in. Not because you failed, but because you stopped trying. Because you know you're practicing something beneath your potential, and it eats at you. But here's the good news. Just like you trained yourself into weakness, you can train yourself out. You can reverse the pattern. You don't have to overhaul your life in one day. You just need to stop the drift. Tighten things up. Pick one small habit and show yourself you can follow through again. Build some integrity with yourself. Because every small win is a message. We're back on track. So if you've been neglecting things, don't panic. But don't lie to yourself either. Call it what it is. You've been training, just in the wrong direction. And now it's time to retrain, not tomorrow. Today. One choice at a time. Because if neglect has momentum, so does discipline. You just have to start pushing the other way. If you trained your way into this life, that means you can train your way into a better one. That's the good news. And it's not theory. It's a decision. You don't need to wait for some breakthrough moment or a fresh start on the calendar. You just need to start doing things differently today. The same way you built the habits that led to frustration, you can build the habits that lead to clarity. The same way you practiced hesitation, you can start practicing courage. The same way you rehearsed delay, you can begin to rehearse action. It all runs on the same principle, repetition. Small, consistent, daily repetition. That's how a life gets built or rebuilt. It starts in the mind, because if you don't retrain the way you think, you'll keep making the same decisions. You'll stay stuck in the same patterns. The mind is like a muscle. Whatever you feed it, whatever you stretch it toward, that's what it starts to produce. So if you've been feeding it excuses, you've got to interrupt that. If you've been rehearsing negative thoughts, you got to confront them, and not once, but over and over. That's why books matter. That's why journaling matters. That's why thinking on paper matters. These aren't fancy habits. They're mental reps. You're conditioning your mind to think differently, to process better, to respond instead of react. Every time you read a page, every time you write down a thought, every time you reflect on your day, you're retraining the mental muscles that shape your life. And it doesn't stop with thinking. Once your mindset starts to shift, your actions have to follow. That's where physical reps come in. Showing up, following through. Not big, flashy moves, just simple things, done consistently. Making the bed, preparing the meal, finishing the task, speaking up when you'd normally stay quiet. Each one seems small, but they build something much bigger. I remember when I started to turn things around. I didn't start with a major overhaul. I picked a few small disciplines and stuck with them. I committed to reading 10 pages a day. I made time to think. I tightened up my schedule. And little by little, I started to feel different. Not because my circumstances changed, but because I did. And when you change, your circumstances begin to catch up. You don't have to be extreme. You just have to be consistent. If you want to become someone who finishes what they start, you've got to start finishing. If you want to become someone who's focused, you've got to start eliminating distractions one by one. If you want to become someone who acts instead of overthinks, you've got to start acting, even if it's just for 5 minutes. Representatives, discipline. That's how retraining happens. And don't wait until you feel like it. Don't wait until it's convenient. The reason you're retraining is because your old habits were too convenient. They felt good in the moment and cost you later. But training always costs something up front, and it pays you later. That's the trade. And it's always worth it. Now, along the way, you'll want to quit. That's normal. You'll hear the old voice. This is too small to matter. It's not working fast enough, but don't listen. Keep going. Because while you may not see the changes immediately, they're happening. You're carving new grooves, building new reflexes. And just like before, your life will start to mirror your training. But this time, it's happening on purpose. Retraining isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming consistent. It's about deciding what kind of person you want to be and then showing up every day and proving it to yourself. Not once, not occasionally, daily. Because once you prove it to yourself, everything else follows. The mindset, the habits, the results, the life. So start now. Pick something small, something within reach, and begin the retraining process. One thought at a time, one action at a time, one day at a time. Because if you trained your way into this life, you can train your way into a better one. Everything you do in private eventually shows up in public. Maybe not right away, maybe not tomorrow, but give it time. And what you've been rehearsing behind closed doors will reveal itself when the pressure hits, when the stakes rise, or when you least expect it. That's why what you practice matters. Not just when people are watching, but especially when they're not. People want to perform well when it counts. They want to stay calm in the tough conversation. They want to lead well under pressure. They want to respond with clarity when things go sideways. But those things don't happen by accident. They happen because you've trained for them, quietly, repeatedly, without applause. You want to know how someone handles chaos? Look at what they've been practicing in the quiet. The person who panics when things go wrong, that's not new behavior. That's a reflex they've been rehearsing for years. Maybe they've been practicing indecision. Maybe they've been avoiding pressure instead of facing it. And when life finally demands something of them, the only thing they know how to give is what they've been practicing. It works the other way too. The person who leads with calm under stress, who keeps their word when it's costly, who handles criticism with grace, that didn't come out of nowhere. That's the result of years of private practice, years of discipline, study, repetition, years of doing things the right way, even when nobody was clapping. I've always believed that pressure doesn't create character, it reveals it. And what it usually reveals is your level of training. That's why the quiet habits matter so much. Not because they look impressive, but because they prepare you for the moments that do. You can't fake preparation. You can't perform at a higher level than you've trained for, not consistently. And this is where a lot of people go wrong. They think they can wing it. They think they'll rise to the occasion. But the truth is, you fall to the level of your training. You fall to your patterns. You fall to whatever you've been doing when it didn't seem to matter. So if you're waiting for the big moment to start training, you're already too late. The big moment will expose the work you've already done or haven't done. This is why private habits are sacred. they shape who you are long before the world sees it. The way you treat people when nobody's watching, that becomes your character. The way you study when there's no test, that becomes your sharpness. The way you manage your time when your schedule is open, that becomes your discipline. All of it shows up eventually. And let's be honest, people can sense it. You ever meet someone who just has substance? Not flashy, not loud, but solid. You can tell they've been doing the work. You can feel the weight of their preparation. It's in the way they carry themselves, the way they answer a question, the way they handle responsibility. That's not something you can fake. That's something you earn in the quiet. So if you want public results, start with private practice. If you want to be confident when the pressure rises, build habits when it's quiet. If you want to lead others, lead yourself when no one's looking. Don't train for show, train for substance. Train for resilience. Train for the life you want to live, not the image you want to project. Because eventually the lights will come on. The moment will arrive. And in that moment, you won't have time to prepare. You'll only have time to perform. And you'll perform exactly how you've trained. You train for this life, whether you meant to or not. The habits, the patterns, the routines. You've been practicing something every day. And the results you're living with right now, that's the evidence. That's what all that practice has built. Not what you hoped for, not what you wished would happen, what you've trained for. And maybe you didn't realize it. Maybe it was unconscious. But that doesn't change the outcome. Because repetition always leads somewhere. And if you don't choose where it's leading, it'll take you wherever your habits point. Good or bad. Helpful or harmful. You're always headed somewhere. Training is the steering wheel. But here's the part that matters most. You can change the direction. You can retrain, starting today. You don't need to feel like it. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to begin. Pick one habit, one small action, one new standard, and start repeating it on purpose. Not for a week, not for a month, but until it becomes who you are. Every time you practice discipline instead of delay, you're retraining. Every time you choose effort over excuses, you're retraining. Every time you respond with intention instead of impulse, you're retraining. And over time, those new habits will shape a new life, one you built on purpose. So take responsibility for your training, because ready or not, it's happening. Every choice is a representative. Every habit is a vote. And every day is another chance to shape who you're becoming. Don't leave that to chance. Train deliberately. Train with direction, because you will live the life you've trained for.